Welcome,
Hello.
everybody. Nana, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Katie, how are you doing?
Doing great.
Yes.
While we let people trickle in, why don't you guys let us know in the chat where you're coming to us from? We like to see, where the audience is in case we can tailor anything. So feel free to let
Yeah.
us know.
We're out here and I'm in Mississauga. That's a suburb of Toronto. And it's a beautiful, sunny, but kind of cold day. But we'll take it. We'll take it. It's fall
Take it.
spring.
Yes, fall spring. Insert number here. We got Burlington, we got Hamilton. I'm in Midtown Toronto. Alberta. Carol,
Airdrie.
how's the weather doing
Yes.
in how's the weather in Alberta today? Well, Alberta's huge, I guess, specifically where
Yeah.
you are.
All of Alberta, Kathleen, tell us.
Wisconsin. Okay.
Alberta, Texas. Oh my goodness, my in-laws just came they drove up from Texas. They went to see the eclipse the other week and they said it was already 36 degrees a couple weeks ago. So
Okay.
I'm a little bit jealous.
It's supposed to get pretty warm this weekend. In Toronto
Okay.
at least. Feeling like 25, so we'll take it. North Carolina,
Oh, can't wait.
Winnipeg, Cochrane, Alberta. There we go. Vancouver.
Vancouver, always a favorite. All right. We'll give another couple seconds. Will this be recorded? I sure hope so.
Sure
Can we,
is.
yeah, it's being recorded right now. Perfect. Beautiful. All right. Oh my goodness. Cochrane, Alberta is warm but cloudy. You know what? No complaints there, Kathleen.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we will get started with everybody's most exciting topic, audit proofing your firm. Why do we care so much about compliance? Well, because it's kind of a pain, right, for a lot of us. It's not recoverable times when we do have to go into audit and have to respond to all those audit inquiries. And so really, we want to make sure that we are ready at all times. Katie and I like to always say, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And that's
Mhm.
certainly what the sentiment behind this presentation today. So my name is Nana Guenther. I am a CPA CA. I have a, small firm background that I worked at the biggest four, one of the big four rather, in audit and assurance for a number of years. So this topic is close to my heart, near and dear. And then I went on to industry after getting the designation and working at several multinational entities doing digitalization projects, controllership, FP&A type of work. So again, really, really focused on what the auditors are interested in, which very much informs a lot of what goes on with our technology and our day-to-day processes, whether it's at a small company or at large companies, whether it's industry or public practice. It informs a lot of the work that accountants do. So I'm happy to share some of our perspectives, and I would like to introduce or pass it on rather to for my colleague to introduce herself. Take it away, Katie.
Awesome. Whoa. Too
Spoilers.
far. Too far. Far.
There we go.
I think it's my first time. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm on the marketing team here. So I do not have the audit background or the professional experience that Nana does, but I do a lot of work with our partners and people in the industry and looking at, seasonality and times of year. And obviously for most people, April is a very tax heavy month. So let's talk audit, right? So we're gonna dive right in.
Yeah.
Oh,
So you saw a little bit of our agenda there.
yeah.
But so we'll give it away. We'll talk about audit today, guys. I hope that that's not a surprise. We'll talk about that landscape generally, why it's particularly pertinent at the moment. We'll talk about specific audit-prone industries. I know some of you are in niches, or some of you might be servicing companies or clients in several different industries. And so it's great to understand some of the more audit pertinent industries so that, again, we can stay ready for those clients in particular. We'll talk about audit assertions. So this is where I really get to geek out on some of that audit background, and then we'll apply it to some of the features at Dext. So wherever possible, right? Because we don't address every single assertion perhaps in detail, but it's important to disclose that and to be clear about that um, where we do address these specific audit assertions. And then we'll have some real practical examples of how this can come in handy where you're doing maybe compliance tax audit, or you're engaged in one, or perhaps you're engaged in a corporate tax audit. So we will be taking Q&A at the end of it. But throughout this presentation, feel free to give us a shout out in the chat, send us some questions and so on, and we'll answer those questions as we go along. So I'll pass it on to Katie right away to talk about the general audit landscape and the trends that we're seeing out in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. If my mouse, there we go. It was just double clicking me for a while. So yeah, I want to dive into some trends first. Obviously, the accounting and bookkeeping industry over the last, well, decade really has undergone a lot of change. And the trends that we're seeing in the audit field are pretty similar to the accounting and bookkeeping industry rather, kind of writ large. The amount of data that auditors need to sift through is enormous, which is where we look at sort of these top four pieces: the AI, machine learning, RPA, blockchain, and data analytics. So when we look at AI and machine learning, for example, they've made audits quicker, more effective, and have ultimately added more value for clients, while attracting exciting talent to the industry. And as specifically AI and RPA grow, the audit landscape gets less manual and less error prone. But when we look at, say, the bottom four trends here, ESG, cybersecurity, remote audits, and sort of that higher standards piece, these are becoming increasingly more significant in auditing, which is requiring more reliable reporting and some improved practices. Auditors must adapt to effectively evaluate and report on these concerns. Now, we're not here to talk about what the life of an auditor is like, obviously, but we think it's important to set the scene so that if you or some of your clients fall into some of these buckets, these specific categories, you can be aware that there might be added attention there going forward. There we go. So when we look specifically at some of the challenges of the audit landscape, some of these can be said again for kind of the accounting and bookkeeping industry at large: the talent gap, the need for better documentation, growing security concerns, technology. The auditing landscape in 2024 is marked by significant technological advancements and really a broadening scope of services, with a focus really on retaining the public's trust in the industry. So challenges ahead, as we look at kind of the coming year, are likely to include the need for auditors to develop new skills, become proficient quickly in the latest technologies, and really adapt to the increasing complexity of business and regulatory environments. Everybody's favorite word there, regulatory. As an industry, audit must use all the tools in its arsenal to ensure it continues to hold the public's trust, and simultaneously, clients will expect an audit experience that only a tech-enabled audit can provide. So these auditors now are really needing to embrace the new technologies, engage in continuous learning, which can, let's be real, you guys are busy. It can be kind of hard to find the time, and adapt to changes in audit methodologies and practices. So by doing so, they can effectively meet the evolving demands of the industry and maintain the integrity and reliability of the profession, which is obviously incredibly important. So when we look at audit-prone industries, so when I look at these, there are some common trends here that we see. A lot of these industries are cash-based, cash-heavy industries, and the CRA and the IRS have also flagged that being self-employed, regardless of industry, is audit-prone. Can you help us understand a bit maybe why cash-based industries or self-employed individuals might be more likely to be audited?
Sure thing. So first things first, there is tax avoidance, and then there's tax evasion. One of those is illegal tax evasion. And so when it comes to cash, it's no secret that it is easier to it's more susceptible to fraud and theft, right? The F word. We don't ever want to mention it, but let's be honest, that's, the first step towards maybe a forensic audit, which is more in depth, which is specifically looking for fraud, right? So, what are the tax authorities really looking for? They're looking for evidence of perhaps tax evasion. So cash-based businesses, so let's say it's a restaurant or a food services industry, these industries are particularly susceptible to some of these issues. So maybe they have high employee turnover. Maybe they have large inventories of valuable goods. So perhaps they have maybe I would say maybe less skilled individual or staff coming in as they turn over. So maybe you have high school students or temp students or so on in some of these industries. Maybe you have volunteers, right? Think not-for-profit. All of these sort of circumstances creates a situation where the audit trail might not be clear. The controls and processes around money movement and cash movement might not be clear, or maybe it just doesn't exist. And so there becomes the risk of material misstatement from unrecorded contributions or from inaccuracies in documentation. And when we think about, self-employed individuals, well, it's just difficult to tie some of the amounts reported to any particular documentation. So let's say for a self-employed individual, you don't get a T4 slip from your employer because you're employing yourself, right? That creates a risk in terms of what you report on your taxes. Maybe if you're in the US, you don't get a W-2 slip, right, from your employer. Similar concept. So, then your tax authority doesn't have a way to match up what you're reporting on your tax return to effectively a third-party documentation, right? So that gives that sets their alarms off a little bit. And so there could be errors, there could be misstatements, and ultimately what they're looking to do is ensure that you are compliant and you're not evading tax. Again, tax avoidance is legal. So you might work with different accounting firms to make sure that you're structured in the right way. But even those structures, they might scrutinize some of those structures, right, to ensure that they are in fact compliant. So keeping proper tax records is really important, and to continue to remain compliant throughout the life cycle of your client is going to be really important as well. Because if they get flagged one year as perhaps being non-compliant, that stays on their record for a while, right? And then they're more susceptible to future audits and future scrutiny. Perhaps this might even impact their other stakeholders and the way that they interact with their other stakeholders. It certainly will impact the way that you interact with your client, right? Everyone becomes on more heightened alert, right? So because you don't want to be a repeat offender, so to speak. So, the staying ready so that you don't have to get ready concept is a really important factor for a lot of these audit-prone industries. Now, finally, I will talk about receipts and documentation, particularly as construction comes up, right? I know that a lot of our clients in particular are in the construction industry. They're always on the go. They're just always on the go. And they have so many different projects. They have so many different inputs. They have so many different subcontractors. So they're having to manage a lot of people, a lot of inputs, a lot of admin. And so there is the opportunity for something to slip, right? They're managing even several different related parties, right? Let's be fair. It's a lot of moving parts, and there's opportunity for something to slip. And so some of this is not always on purpose, right? But from a tax authority perspective, they consider this and see there. So these are the types of industries that they might go after or scrutinize a little bit more. So, Katie, I'm sure that some of the individuals who are joining today have some experience with audits, but let us know. I think you've got a poll up, right, Katie?
Yes, I'm just gonna launch it right now. This double click is killing me today. Um, and I should see it now, which is, have you ever had a compliance or income tax audit in the last year? We've got yes, no, unsure. No is coming in hot.
That's
We've got one
good.
yes, feeling for you, two yeses. But the majority looks like, so far about 90% have not had an audit, which
That's
is great.
good.
I'm sure for the two of you who have, probably pretty difficult. And to Nana's point, right, if things are intentional or not, unfortunately, does not matter to the authorities, which is why it's so important to document everything because it's the end result is the same. If you don't have it, you don't have it.
Right.
We've
Right.
got one person who said they were unsure, so might just
Yeah.
not be aware of what your company's done. So I'll end that poll in just 5 seconds. We got most
So,
people there.
yeah, for sure. And this is in the past year. So there might be others who have experienced or been a part of an audit over a longer period of time. As we'll talk about a little bit later, the CRA in particular, as we're in Canada, has modified some of their requirements to audit, where sales tax audit might look different from a corporate tax audit or income tax audit. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's get right into the fun part for me, which is audit assertions. Let's understand what they are. Audit assertions are basically the framework with which auditors operate to assess the reasonability or plausibility of financial information. So to be clear, they're not immediately looking for fraud necessarily, right? But they're looking for something that is not quite right. And so once that's something that's not quite right is uncovered rather, then there's second level, deeper, more forensic type of audit. And that could really drag on. So, first and foremost, we'll start from the top right. We'll start with existence. What is existence? Existence on occurrence are, two assertions. One is for the balance sheet and one is for the income statement. And basically, it's making sure that everything that is in your GL has actually happened or actually exists, right? So having a process whereby all your GL transactions flow through the same ecosystem or the same app like Dext, you increase the likelihood of compliance with that assertion. Completeness is making sure that all the transactions that are relevant have in fact been recorded in your general ledger. Okay, so we'll get into all of these assertions in the product in a little bit, but really we'll stay high level for now. What is valuation and allocation? Means all financial statement items are recorded at the appropriate value. So, for example, accounts receivables are only recorded at their collectible amounts, right? So net of bad debt allowances. That will be an example of valuation and allocation. Um, Accuracy, we know this one. All financial statement items are accurately recorded. Classification, which is all financial statement items are classified or categorized appropriately. Cutoff refers to all transactions are recorded in the correct period. So this is particularly pertinent around this time of the month. We're getting it to around the end of the month. And we want to make sure everything that happened in April is actually recorded in April and not categorized in the month of May, for example, right? This gets even more particular towards the end of quarters, or of course, the end of fiscal years or tax years, really wanting to make sure that those transactions are recorded in the correct periods. So rights and obligations might look like all balances are in fact recorded for that business are actually for that business and not maybe related to personal or some other related party, perhaps, right? And that all cash balances, for example, are in fact those of that business and not somebody else. So that you might, recognize some of these situations when we talked about the industries who are prone to audit, right? So to bring back construction, when we talk about rights and obligations and all the related parties that they sometimes create, all the different projects that they sometimes create, it is going to be important to ensure that balances are recorded in the correct companies, and that maybe if they're self-employed, that any cash transfers in and out of the corporation are accurately recorded, right? So these are some of the ways that audit assertions affect specific industries. So let's get into the product. Let's see if I can share here.
I will stop sharing momentarily.
Okay, fantastic. Can you see my Dext Prepare screen, okay?
Sure can.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so let's start again at the top with existence on occurrence. Something that a feature that we really like at Dext are the match features. So existence and occurrence are again making sure that everything that's in your general ledger has actually happened. So how can you prove that it's actually happened? Well, you've got the supporting documentation right here to show that it's actually happened. So we have something called GeoMatch, which means that we are matching that documentation to your general ledger. So you've got backup for the information that's in your general ledger. Something else that's important is bank match. So you can have a GeoMatch and a bank match. That means that you've got all of the items that are recorded here are actually traced to bank transactions. Okay, so you've now got a three-way match. You're really audit compliant here in terms of that assertion, right? So you can, take hats off to you if you're utilizing those match features. Now, completeness might look like bank transactions where you're using match features along with the publish feature. So if we go into our bank space here and we go to our process statements or statements that we've collected, we might want to look at, let's say, this transactions section, okay? Now, a number of these transactions, we can see that we don't have a match for this bank. But if we go into this Scotiabank, similarly, we don't have a match. But if we did, what we would want to make sure is for this particular transaction where cash is going out, we would want to request paperwork. And that way we know that we have support for the completeness aspect. So we will get the paperwork to prove, to match up to our bank. And then we would publish that paperwork into our general ledger. And that's the complete cycle right there, right? So we know that everything, now existence and completeness are addressed with just those match features. Okay. So if we go into something like, we'll go back into our cost space. A recent feature that I think has been really helpful, because we've done this webinar in the past, Katie, and I recognize valuation and allocation as maybe a gap for our product. And actually, I'm really proud to say that one of our recent features, Email Trail, really helps us address that valuation and allocation. So how do we do that? Well, let's look at this Uber Eats receipt as an example. This is helping us, see the documentation itself. Okay, great. So that's something that we had before. But now, any context related to this documentation, we can see it directly in Dext Prepare. So what can this look like? This might be something like, if the context around this Uber Eats receipt was that your client is telling you that only 80% of it is a business expense, right? And 20% of it is actually personal. While you have that context to ensure that this gets recorded at the right value or the right proportion in terms of valuation allocation. Now, another area where this will help, we'll get into this a little bit later, it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, is Dexbox, which is going to help us store additional documentation that might impact this. So let's say this was a sales invoice, right? And we wanted to say that only 75% of this sale or invoice is actually going to be collectible from the client because maybe they have some credit risk there, right? Well, maybe we'll indicate that in the email trail, but something else that might help you in terms of validating that credit risk narrative is maybe you have a credit report from them, right? And with Dexbox, you would be able to store that type of documentation in Dext Prepare. So all of your backup is in one place and you can kind of move on. So of course, we boast about our 99% accuracy when it comes to our data capture. This is source documentation, like bank statements from receipts and so on. And that seamless integration between Dext Prepare and your general ledger. We focus on capturing information as quickly as possible, as easily as possible, with as little human intervention as possible, with that 99% accuracy, right? Because we like to mess things up a little bit. So if we can, as human beings, get out of the way, I think that really helps us with this accuracy component, and that is a major assertion that we get to address. From a classification standpoint, using things like supplier rules, line item extraction can really help us ensure that items are categorized in the right chart of accounts, right? So perhaps I want to go to, let's say, buy more, right? And I want to set a rule that every time I get something from buy more, it's going to be categorized to office expenses or general admin in this case. Well, I can set that. And again, I can be very comfortable that this is going to be the way that this gets categorized on an ongoing basis, right? Perhaps they're individual line items. So here there's new printer, there's color cartridge. Maybe I want to set up a specific supplier rule in a lot more detail. And this will allow me to set rules based on individual line items, right? Or even individual like concepts. So one example that I like to use in Canada is we're able to write off a portion of our home office expenses in our taxes. So if you know that your internet bill is collected and you allocate 10% of your home to your home office, well, 10% of that internet bill might be allocated to those home office expenses, right? Which means 90% of that is actually just a shareholder loan. It's not actually a business expense. Well, you can set a supplier rule here where whenever you get a invoice from, let's say it's Rogers or Bell or TELUS, you can set it to, let's say, general and admin costs or office costs. Do we have an office expenses? Perfect, right? And we can ensure that it is, 10% of it is allocated to office expenses, and the remainder is allocated to shareholder loan. And this way, we don't have to worry about it every month, right? And the risk of us having to do that calculation on a regular basis, well, you know what? It's not worth the time when something like this can be done. So let's talk about cutoff really quickly. I love to talk about our ability to search transactions by even transaction dates. So we can do that right within here. We have a number of different search functions, which we'll get into a little bit later, but we're able to search right within here for specific transaction dates, and we can search for even specific due dates here, right? Maybe that will inform any of your tax jurisdictions and how they treat particular documentation. But apart from that, something that I wanted to showcase is our expense reports section, which we continue to improve. I know that since I've been at Dext, this has been an area that we have really focused on improving. And well, one thing that I love about it is, from a cutoff perspective, is effortless expense reports. So we can make sure that let's say for this particular user, they submit expenses on a periodic basis. We can make sure that any expense reports that are created for that are relevant for the month of April are actually recorded in the month of April, right? So when May starts, a new expense report gets created for May, and any expenses that that person incurs are going to be, you can add that to the May expense report and effectively closing off the April expense report. This makes it just so much easier to, especially for cash disbursements to employees, which, as we talked about, some of those audit-prone industries tend to be in, to make sure that we have some controls around the expense report approval process. We don't do cash disbursements, so I'm going to be very candid about that. That's not an area we're in. Hopefully, I can say the word yet. We'll see. But in the meantime, we really make sure that everything up to that point is addressed from a compliance perspective, right? And then you can attach and you can attach that expense report to your general ledger entry effectively, and that shows up as a bill in QBO. So this just makes it really, really easy to create these different expense report based on the different users and set up different frequencies, and ensures that you are operating within the right cutoff period, right? Rights and obligations, as I mentioned, with bank statement extraction and other supporting documentation can really help us verify that these types of transactions are truly belonging to whichever company that they're recorded in, right? And another feature that really helps us with that is in these lists, we have payment methods, and you can set something similar to those supplier rules by payment method. So let's say I scroll down here, and every time Michelle submits a document, I want to make sure that it's applied to this particular payment method, right? So and that particular payment method is now going to be published to whether it's a credit cards, or whether it's going to be published to cash, or whether it's going to be published to bills. It really just sets the controls in place based on who is submitting that documentation into Dext Prepare. So a number of different ways that, we really facilitate the compliance with different audit assertions that your audit or tax pro is really going to be interested in. So we'll get into a few more of the specific asks that might come from auditors in just a moment, but I'll pass it back to Katie just to actually share your screen, and I'll talk a little bit about sales tax compliance.
Oof.
It's heavy, hot and
Everyone's
heavy.
favorite, I'm sure.
Perfect. So in sales tax compliance, in the past, especially in Canada, most audits of smaller businesses, generally businesses with annual sales of less than 4 million, have been done as combined audits. So they were one audit covering income tax and HST. So combined audits have now been discontinued, and therefore businesses would either be subject to an income tax audit or an HST GST audit. And really, most audits are selected based on an assessment of risk of non-compliance, right? But non-compliance in one area of tax doesn't necessarily correlate to non-compliance in the other area of tax. So in these cases, the business may be subject to only a brief compliance review of the other tax, but a full audit of or rather than a full audit, rather, of both sets of taxes or types of taxes. So often with, new businesses, when they register for HST, often the first return can be a repayment, right? Because you're incurring a lot of you're getting a lot in, and the CRA may inquire into that. Or you can just ask for supporting documentation, right? Or they might rather, sorry, ask for supporting documentation. Corporation tax around specific general ledger activity or invoices from specific suppliers. And then just when there's an HST inspection and where an officer may even come into your office, right? And they might go into your client's office and request to see a long list of documentation. And all of this time responding to audit inquiries is non-recoverable. It's non-recoverable time. Or certainly it's really difficult to have the conversation with your client about how much time you're taking to spend or interact with the auditors, right? So it's facilitating the ease of audit is something that is near and dear to us. So let's talk about some of the specific sales tax audit inquiries that might come your way, right? So they might look for the largest 10 invoices that make up sales tax paid to suppliers. They might search for specific date ranges or amounts or items published. They might just want all of the items in a PDF. You want them to have all the items in PDF because you don't want them to show up in your office as much as possible, right? So let's make sure that we look at what that looks like in Dext Prepare. So Katie, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen for a little bit.
Please do.
All right. Can you see my Dext Prepare screen again?
Sure can.
All right, so we'll continue where we left off from this list space or the bank payment space, and we'll go back into our cost space. So here we're going to assume that your items have already been published, of course, because now you're actually going through the audit. So they would show up under your archive. So what you might want to do is search for year-to-date invoices. So I can see that I only have a few here, but I might want to search here, right? Under my dates, maybe I want to search for the last, yeah, let's do year-to-date. How about that? Easy peasy, right? Simple enough for me to get that from Dext Prepare. So perhaps I want to search by the total or, sort by the total. I can do so where I'm looking for the top invoices that are making up some of my balances. I can do so right within Dext Prepare. I can also filter for with tax. Maybe I only want to look at the transactions that were tax effective. Well, I can do that right within Dext Prepare as well. So once I do that, okay, great. So I've done all the filtering and that's fine, but I have to provide it to my auditor. I can just check off some of these amounts and export it to a PDF, or I can export it to a zip file. And again, I can just say have at it to the auditors and they can do what they need to do. And it doesn't take me a lot of time to pull this together, right? We did this in real time. So getting back to our corporate tax as well. So I'll let Katie actually share her screen. From corporate tax inquiry perspective, similar to the sales tax, there might be specific items that they're looking for. So maybe they'll look for a copy of all invoices that make up a particular financial statement line item. So even they might want to check your trial balance, right, to identify specific accounts. So maybe those will look like meals and entertainment. That's a popular one they love to look into. Maybe they'll look into travel, right? And so they might look for the invoices that make up a specific account. They really like to look into shareholder loan, right, and see what some of those cash movements look like. So we'll need the ability to kind of filter and search for some of those. They might look for all the invoices from a specific supplier, right? Maybe they have a supplier on their radar, or maybe a supplier kind of rang a bell for them, right? So this is something that they might ask you for. So we can use our advanced search and again, download those PDFs. And of course, they will want to, as we talked about, make sure that things actually correlate to your general ledger. It really starts with the information in your general ledger, and then they're tying back to the supporting documentation. So accuracy and completeness and all the audit assertions that we talked about are going to be really relevant, particularly during that corporate tax inquiry. So Katie, if you don't mind, I will share my screen one more time as we dive back into Dext Prepare. So we'll start where we left off. So we talked about, we've shown some of the features for the sales tax inquiries, and those are going to be applicable in terms of the search and the functions. Those are going to be applicable for corporate tax as well, right? And how to export. But maybe we want to use our advanced search to search for specific categories. So we talked about, what was it, travel being a really popular one. Well, we can find that here. And when we apply it, we can see all the transactions that fell under travel. So we're not digging into paperwork. We're not going anywhere. We're just searching within the one app to find the information that they need. And again, we'll export it and move on with more recoverable activities. So one of the topics that we talked about is they might flag a specific supplier of interest. So when we scroll down to our lists on the side, maybe they flag buy more. Buy more sounds suspicious to them. So we want to dig in and find some of the activity related to buy more. So we'll go into our archive. We see that there's only one in our archive that we've transacted with buy more so far, and we can view all the transactions here for buy more. So it's just, again, really, really easy for us to meet their requests so that we can carry on, right? So Katie, I'll pass it back in terms of a share so we can look at our presentation a little bit. So in summary, some of the things that we talked about here is we want to save time. We want to save time when we're dealing with those pesky auditors. And I can say that because I was one. I know that the common joke, which wasn't really a joke, is that when an auditor comes on site, usually you put them in the coldest room, the closet, basically, because you don't want them to stay for an extended period of time. You want them to be really uncomfortable. I don't recommend you do that to your auditors. I recommend that you get some documentation, get some technology that makes it as easy as possible so that they don't have to come to your office and spend a lot of time with you, right? So we want to save time. We want it to be convenient. They can access information from their office. It's environmentally friendly. I remember when I was at the Big Four, we had literally rooms of just documentation and to move like rooms of like filing cabinets around to find what we needed. So it's just more environmentally friendly, and it's actually more economical as well because we're not having to spend, rooms worth of our real estate on storage costs to meet audit requirements. So ultimately, Katie, I'll pass it back to you to talk about what else firms can do to ensure that they are audit proof.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that physical storage piece, I think, gets missed. I remember I worked in an education company, but we got audited, and it was like everyone had to go down and like grab the files. Like they wanted it all. And so that storage piece is still super important. So when we look at steps to ensure compliance here, as Nana mentioned, it's really important to make sure that all of the items going through the bank are supported with documentation. We also discussed the cash disbursement to employees. So especially if we're looking at construction or restaurant where people don't have company cards, there's going to be a lot of expense reports, and it's going to people's personal cards. So just having that proof to support cash disbursements to employees is so important. And then really making sure that you're capturing the context behind the supporting documents, right? Capture that story and that you and your client are clear on that as well. And that's, Nana was showing sort of the email trail. That context is really important. If you just saw a smart split of 10% going somewhere else, well, why is that? Oh, it's home office expenses. Okay, well, we need to be clear about that, right? So context is king.
Yeah.
And then really having clear protocols and procedures for your clients, right? This is for them, right? When you're getting audited, it's their business. So they are the ones being audited. They are responsible for the audit, and you need to really make it clear that it is on them, that the firm isn't liable, and that they are. So getting buy-in at that client level can be difficult, but is super important. So this helps to be kind of proactive about the difficult conversations, and it's just really in everyone's best interest to be on the same page. And Nana, I know you had mentioned that I think there's an IRS regulation where you can actually report people who may not be in compliance, and then you can receive proceeds.
Yeah, exactly. So any of your clients who may not be so tight-lipped, right? If somebody overhears them talking about something that might sound like tax evasion, well, they could actually report them to the IRS, and the IRS will follow up and correspond with them. And if the IRS is successful, they could actually get a portion of the proceeds that they collect. So it's at the end of the day, all of this compliance requirement, it's not only for the firm, right? Like it's actually for your clients. And so, part of the conversation, to Katie's point, is to be proactive about that upfront, right? You want to get your clients buy-in, because at the end of the day, they are liable, but you also are trying to manage your firm and you want to keep positive relationships. So it's kind of an awkward conversation when those things happen, and it's a difficult conversation to say, look, you're ultimately liable. And maybe I could have advised you to help us obtain some of the documentation on a timely basis. It's just a tricky client relations conversation when that time comes, right? And so that's why we really focus on getting your clients buy-in from the beginning and on an ongoing basis, so it doesn't become this headache of communication at the time when everybody's stressed, right? If I tell you, Katie, that I've got an audit coming and you need to help me with whatever it is because I've been engaging with you as my accountant, I'm stressed, right? And so things are not going to, the chances of things going as smoothly in terms of the communication becomes a challenge. So we certainly want to make sure that we are staying ready, Katie.
Absolutely. And Nan, I know you already showed off some great features and kind of showed us, how Dext can kind of help you stay audit ready. So maybe you can just kind of run through these features again, Cole's Notes version, and just kind of, tell us how Dext can really help. I know you did mention that like we don't handle cash disbursements, but there's a lot of other aspects that we obviously do handle.
Absolutely. So I'll start with that document storage and audit-ready archive. We store information for up to 10 years, right? I know that the tax authorities in North America require up to 7 years. Well, this then just you have a peace of mind where it is stored in a secure platform on an ongoing basis. And not only is it stored with us, but because we publish that information, or you will publish that information to your general ledger, that documentation is accompanied to your general ledger. So you can feel that much more secure in having a couple different places where the same documentation or the backup exists to support your financial data. As I said, we're working on Dexbox as we continue to innovate on our features to ensure that our partners can be audit ready. So Dexbox is going to be where you can add that additional context, right? The example that I used earlier was maybe you want to store a credit risk report, right? It's not necessarily information that's going to end up in your general ledger, but it's going to be information that's going to back up some of the information in your general ledger, as an example. So this is something that we are actively working on to provide. Our email trail feature, which is new, right? And we have an audit trail feature. All of this really allows us to capture the context, capture any movements in the documentation. If there are any, there shouldn't be, but if there are any, all of that is captured within the platform. And this is something that can help you back up your story when the time comes, right? Document content search. So we've actually recently improved our search function where you can actually search the data within the supporting documentation, right? So you can search for, I don't know, specific words that are used within the documentation. Perhaps you want to search for every time the word printer is mentioned, right? Within an invoice. Well, you can do that now, which is really, really cool. And of course, our expense reports, as Katie mentioned, okay, sure, we're not doing cash disbursements yet, but before that cash disbursement happened, you want some controls around what is meant to go out, what is it for, and who it's going to go to. And so that is something that we address with our expense report function, and the cutoff around there and the payment methods that you can apply to the automation rather around the different payment methods applying to specific users. All of that is really helping with that compliance and control of the movement of information. So I'll pass it
Yeah.
back to you, Katie, talk about some of our other tricks.
Yeah. So these are just like little tips that, this probably isn't revolutionary, but I think we just don't always utilize email even to the fullest extent to make it as easy as possible. So like email subject lines. How many emails are in your inbox right now that are re something else, and the email chain has spawned into a totally different topic? Rename your email chains so that when someone is asking, I need an invoice on this, or can you prove this? Like that Outlook search, that Google Drive search, whichever is actually pulling up the relevant documents. Now, it's also, right, as Nana said, like we got 7 years. So there's going to be a lot of emails and a lot of documentation. And if you have it but can't find it, that's not useful. That is not helpful. So similarly, it's like know where your data is stored and for how long, physical and digital. Does your email provider delete your emails after a certain time frame? You may need to pay for extra storage to make sure that that is up to date. What are your archive settings like? I know some companies where all of your emails, does not matter what they are deleted out of your Outlook within 30 days. Every 30 days, like end of month, the emails are gone. So people have to download them and archive them somewhere else. So if this happens to you, like what would you do in that situation, right? So you just need to make sure that you can actually find the files. Where are the physical files being stored if you still have a ton? We used to have, where I used to work, a warehouse with very large storage fees. But what if there's a flood at that warehouse, right? Who is responsible for that? Again, like the CRA and the IRS do not care, in terms of sort of natural disasters, which takes us to redundancy, like triple redundancy if you can, right? Fires, hardware failure, loss of devices. And occasionally, right, as Nana was saying, you might have some bad actors in there as well who are like, I know this group isn't in compliance and I'm going to report them. Also, it's sometimes as simple as if your company, once someone leaves the company, sometimes any document they owned is no longer accessible. That's absolutely happened to me. Someone has left the company. I can no longer access any of those Google Sheets because the user has been deleted internally. And those sheets to me are now completely inaccessible. So little things like that is just kind of being aware of if someone asked you, do you have this document from 5 years ago? If you can't say yes, then that's a problem. So, if you have your general ledger and you have a Dext, make sure it's also in Dropbox, Google Drive. You can connect Rewind to QBO. We did a session with Kelly Parks at Ignite last year. It's like triple redundancy if you can. And then just really having those robust security measures. So having those governance policies and procedures to ensure the security, integrity, and confidentiality of financial data. That's incredibly important. And establishing clear guidelines for data collection, storage, access. We kind of talked about that. Just making sure that this financial data is encrypted and that there's regular backups, right? You don't want to ever be responsible for lost data. So you can also just conduct kind of periodic security assessments and even something simple, right? Like two-factor authentication, which I know can be frustrating sometimes if you're ever trying to log into like Salesforce and your phone isn't in the room and you've got 15 seconds. And it's also important if you work with third parties. What is their security policy like? So just some little things to kind of help you get ahead of it. Just because you haven't been audited yet, as I like to say, does not mean that you will not be audited in the future.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just important. There's just these little tools like email subject lines. Make them clear. If you're in a Slack heavy business and you just upload things in a Microsoft Teams or what have you, like just name the documents appropriately. Just little things. So when someone knocks on your door and says, please hand this over, you actually know where it is. Or if you don't, even if you know that you don't have it, at least you can point them and say, I know that we actually don't have this. And it will at least save some time and kind of cut through it. So we'll go to some questions. We just have one more poll if you just want to hear from us.
Yeah.
And then and Chet has said that I love that all the documents can be backed up to Google Drive by year and month, and these folders can then be shared with anyone, even the auditors. Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's a big one.
Big one.
Katie, something that I would be remiss not to mention is receipts nowadays, the content on those receipts. They disappear almost immediately, right? I know I found a Costco receipt in my pocket the other day, and I just went last weekend, and I can barely read half of the stuff on that receipt. Well, a year from now, if I only interact with my accountant once a year, right? First of all, we hope that that's not the case because we know that that's a challenge in itself. But if I want to provide documentation to my accountant a year from now, I'm not going to be able to read that. So I need that information to be digitized as soon as possible, right? As soon as I incur that transaction. And again, we talked about using Google Drive. You can use Dropbox, and hopefully we can use Dexbox really soon. A number of different ways in which we can get that documentation in a secure place where we can actually read it and find it. So that's useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Or again, if we're dealing with construction clients, restaurant clients, it's in the car, there's grease, food grease, car grease, you've got, dogs in the truck. I know we have a lot of construction clients who, like, before they leave their car at the end of the day, just make sure they have a picture of all of their receipts, and just to make sure. And then again, like if you just have them in your photo roll and you have a folder of receipts and they're by month, like anything that when someone says this is an expense from April of last year, go into your albums, that's in your iPhone, your Android, and it's just about really capturing, making sure that you have it. And I think sometimes with digital files, we take for granted that they're always going to be there. But again, if you can't find it, it might as well not be there. And so I think if that's the thing to impart is make sure it's findable in whatever method makes sense to you. If you still want to put them then on a USB and you have a file box of USBs, then that's fine too. It's just make sure that you have them. So
yeah, for sure.
I don't think we have any
questions. I think we answered a couple on the go, right?
Yeah.
We had a good suggestion from Sherry, where she said, make sure that you're building into your engagement letter that reviews and audit and other assurance engagements are not included in your price. So that's a great way, again, to be proactive. So nobody's surprised at the end, right? We always talk about, when I was in public practice, providing a no surprises approach. This is what it is. So include those parameters in your engagement letter. So great call out, Sherry.
And then one from Jennifer, how in depth is this setup for each client? Jennifer, do you just mean like how long does it take to actually get somebody set up in Dext, get them using it?
Yes, exactly. Perfect. So really, we work with firms to ensure that they're actually realizing the efficiency of what the features and benefits that we have to offer, right? So if you apply a process to, I don't know, 10% of your clients, are you really going to realize that efficiency at scale? I think that's the question that we tend to ask, right? So we work with a model that encourages firms to apply Dext to a number of their clients. Why am I saying this? because as you add more of your clients to Dext, you get more and more of a white glove type of service in terms of helping you set up, helping you train your staff, helping you train your clients, right? So we complete one-to-many type of trainings, and the continuous support that is provided by your account manager who you can get in touch with if you have any questions or so on. So we have a customer success team that really helps with that setup initially and continues to work with you and your account manager as you continue your journey here with Dext.
And then again, it's like once you have a client set up and as they upload their first receipts, you can just start setting supplier rules, customer rules, payment method rules. Like,
yeah,
you set it and forget it once as they come in. So again, it's easier to kind of do it as they come in. So you don't 3 months later go, shoot, I've got 70 receipts. I wish I'd categorize these first.
yeah.
The platform is I think is pretty user friendly. I know a lot of dashboards look pretty similar nowadays. So if you have any familiarity with other dashboards,
Yeah.
menu bar, it's all
Sure. And I think what I want to say, I have to give kudos here to our customer success team is they really make sure that you're not just bringing analog processes to a digital space, right? So they work with you to understand what are your real processes to date and how can we perhaps make them more agile in a digital space, right? So you're not just copying and pasting from the old to the new. So that is something that is really important. In terms of the cost of Dext, again, that is something that with our model where it decreases based on the number of clients that you're adding to Dext Repair. So I think Robin, that will be best for us to connect with you in terms of how many clients you're working with and what you're kind of looking for your client base.
So we can definitely get in touch with you, Robin, and explain some of that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know we're at
Beautiful.
time. We're a minute over. There's just so much to talk about in terms of audit. So I had a lot of fun. Nana, did you have fun today?
I always have fun talking about audit, you know, and I'm always pushing it in the company as well, that so that we talk more and more about how we help accountants from an audit perspective. And so I really hope this was relevant for you and pertinent for your business, and happy to continue the conversation after this.
Awesome. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to the Successful Bookkeeper for having us. And hopefully we'll see you all next time.
Thank you all. Bye.